Chapter 21 of A Daughter of the Sioux. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Vendetti, MikeVendetti.com. A Daughter of the Sioux by Charles King. Chapter 21. Thanksgiving at Frayne. Thanksgiving Day at Frayne. Much of the garrison was still afield, bringing back to their lines and, let us hope, to their senses, the remnant of Stabber's band, chased far into the Sweetwater hills before they would stop. While Henry's column kept Lame Wolf in such active movement, the misnamed chieftain richly won his latter sobriquet, the Skipper. The general had come whirling back from Beecher in his Concord wagon to meet Mr. Hay as they bore that invalid home from the Big Horn. Between the fever-weakened trader and the famous frontier soldier there had been brief conference, all that the doctors felt they could allow, and then the former had been put to bed under the care of his devoted wife, while the latter, without so much as sight of a pillow, had set forth again out Sweetwater way to wind up the campaign. This time he went in saddle, sending his own team over the range of the Medicine Bow to carry a convalescent subaltern to the side of a stricken father. The sender ignorant, possibly, of the post commander's prohibition, ignoring it if, as probable, it was known to him. The good old doctor himself had bundled the grateful lad and sent a special hospital attendant with him. Mrs. Dade and her devoted allies up the row had filled with goodies a wonderful luncheon basket, while Mrs. Hay had sent stores of wine for the use of both invalids and had come down herself to see the start. For without a word indicative of reproof, the general had bidden Flint remove the blockade, simply saying he would assume all responsibility, both for Mrs. Hay and the young Indian girl, given refuge under the trader's roof until the coming of her own people, still out with Stabber's band. Flint could not fathom it. He could only obey. And now, with the general gone and Beverly Field away, with Hay home and secluded by order from all questioning or other extraneous worry, with the wounded soldiers safely trundled into hospital, garrison interest seemed to center for the time mainly in that little Ogallamade, Flint's sole Sioux captive, who was housed, said the much interrogated domestic, in Mrs. Hay's own room instead of Miss Flowers, while the lady of the house, when she slept at all, occupied a sofa near her husband's bedside. Then came the tidings that Blake, with the prisoners from Knovewood Creek and Bear Cliff, was close at hand, and everybody looked with eager eyes for the coming across the snowy prairie of that homeward-bound convoy, that big village of the Sioux, with its distinguished captives, wounded and unwounded. One of the former, the young sub-chief Eagle Wing, alias Moreau, one of the latter a self-constituted martyr, since she was under no official restraint, Nanette Flower, hovering ever about the litter, bearing that sullen and still defiant brave, whose side she refused to leave. Not until they reached Fort Wayne, not until the surgeon, after careful examination, declared there was no need of taking Moreau into hospital, no reason why he should not be confined in the prison room of the guard-house, were they able to induce the silent, almost desperate girl to return to her aunt. Not until Nanette realized that her warrior was to be housed within wooden walls whence she would be excluded, could Mrs. Hay, devoted to the last, persuade the girl to reoccupy her old room and to resume the dress of civilization. Barring the worsted hood, she was habitated like a chieftain's daughter, in gaily beaded and embroidered garments when captured by Blake's command. Once within the trader's door, she had shut herself in her old room, the second-floor front, refusing to see anybody from outside the house unless she could be permitted to receive visits from the captive Sioux, and this the major flintily forbade. It was nightfall when the letter-bearers reached the post, Hay's rejoicing mules braying unmelodious ecstasy at sight of their old stable. It was dark when the wounded chief was borne into the guard-house, uttering not a sound, and Nanette was led within the trader's door. Yet some one had managed to see her face, for the story went all over the wondering post that very night. women flitting with it from door to door, that every vestige of her beauty was gone. She looked at least a dozen years older. Blake, when questioned after the first rapture of the homecoming had subsided, would neither affirm nor deny. "She would neither speak to me nor hearken," said he, whimsically. "The only thing she showed was teeth and temper." Then presently they sent a lot of the Sioux, Stabber's village, and Lame Wolf's combined, by easy stages down the Platte to Laramie, and then around by Rawhide and the Neroba to the old Red Cloud agency, there to be fed and coddled and cared for, wounded warriors and all, except a certain few, including this accomplished orator and chieftain, convalescing under guard at Frayne. About his case there hung details and complications far too many and intricate to be settled short of a commission. Already had the tidings of this most important capture reached the distant East. Already both Indian Bureau and peace societies had begun to wire the general in the field and work the President and the press at home. Forgotten was the fact that he had been an intolerable nuisance to Buffalo Bill and others who had undertaken to educate and civilize him. The Wild West show was now amazing European capitals and therefore beyond consulting distance. Forgotten were escapades at Harrisburg, Carlisle, and Philadelphia. Suppressed were circumstances connecting him with graver charges than those of repeated roistering and aggravated assault. Ignored, or as yet unheard, were the details of his reappearance on the frontier in time to stir up most of the war spirit developed that September, and to take a leading part in the fierce campaign that followed. He was a pupil of the nation, said the good people of the Indian Friends Societies, a youth of exceptional intelligence and promise, a son of the Sioux, whose influence would be of priceless value could he be induced to complete his education and accept the views and projects of his Eastern admirers. It would never do to let his case be settled by soldiers, settlers, and cowboys, said Philanthropy. They would hang him, starve him, break his spirit at the very least. They were treating him particularly well just now, as he had sense enough to see. There must be a deputation, a committee to go out at once to the West, with proper credentials, per diem mileage, and clerks, to see to it that these unfortunate children of the mountain and prairie were accorded fair treatment and restored to their rights, especially this brilliant young man, Moreau. The general was beyond reach and reasoning with, but there was Flint, eminent for his piety and untrammelled in command. Flint, with aspirations of his own, the very man to welcome such influence as theirs, and, correspondingly, to give ear to their propositions. 2 days after the safe lodgment of Eagle Wing behind the bars, the telegrams were coming by dozens, and 1 week after that deserved incarceration, Fort Frayne heard with mild bewilderment the major's order for Moreau's transfer to the hospital. By that time letters, too, were beginning to come, and 2 nights after his removal to the little room but lately occupied by Lieutenant Field, this very Thanksgiving night, in fact, the single sentry at the door stood attention to the commanding officer, who in person ushered in a womanly form enveloped in hooded cloak, and, with bowed head, Nanette Flower passed within the guarded portal, which then closed behind her, and left her alone with her wounded brave. Blake and Billings had been sent on to Red Cloud, guarding the presumably repentant Ogalallas. Webb, Ray, Gregg, and Ross were still afield in chase of Stabber. Dade, with 4 companies of infantry, was in the Bighorn guarding Henry's wagon train. There was no one now at Frayne in position to ask the new commander questions, for Dr. Waller had avoided him in every possible way, but Waller had nobly done the work of his noble profession. Moreau, or Eagle Wing, was mending so very fast there was no reason whatever why the doctor should object to his receiving visitors. It was Flint alone who would be held responsible if anything went wrong. Yet Fort Frayne, to a woman, took fire at the major's action. 2 days previous he might have commanded the support of Mrs. Wilkins, but Nanette herself had spoiled all chance of that. It seemed the lady had been to call at Mrs. Hay's the previous day.